Okay, we'll see if you're a little more awake than 7 o'clock or a little less sunbaked than 5 o'clock last night, because we're in Jeopardy, the lightning round. And so you need to put your hand up as quickly as you can if this applies to you. And of course, those joining us live stream, I won't be able to see you putting your hand up, so I'll have to split the Jeopardy points with everybody this morning. Have you ever been to the market? Okay, most everybody's been to the market. Have you ever been to the mall? Okay. Have you ever been to the movies? Awesome. Have you ever been to the moon? Nobody should be putting their hand up at that. We did celebrate 53 years ago this past week of landing on the moon. Achievements that we have been able to accomplish through God's grace and blessing. The intelligence we have been given is not something that simply happened. So one final question, have you ever been frustrated? Every hand should go up at that point. Even infants are frustrated when they're wet or hungry or in need of love and compassion. Every human being gets frustrated. Even those designing how do we get to the moon, frustrated. Note, try again. Go back to the drawing board. But how do you counter that frustration? There's one word in the gospel that the Lord speaks to his disciples and to us, and that is persistence. Being persistent. 9th grade. Oh, I'll never get this concept of algebra. Oh, books on the floor. And somebody kindly came in and said, let's try again. No, you can do it. You can do it. Be persistent. And the persistence, it pays off. And indeed, we landed on the moon. But what about persistence in the life of faith? How often do we take things for granted? Or perhaps become frustrated? The catechumens, as we began before the liturgy this morning, held the cross. And we make the sign of the cross at the beginning as we gather. We are signed with the cross as we are sent out into the world at the end of the liturgy. Before we have our meals, we make the sign of the cross. Sometimes, all too often, it becomes routine, becomes very rote. And we do it without even thinking of the impact it has upon our lives. As I mentioned earlier, from the 2nd century, those desiring to follow Christ were claimed by his cross, the sign of his cross. And you saw the candidates becoming catechumens, those counted among the children of God. The sign of the cross is nothing to take lightly, because the sign of the cross, we see in that the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. We see in that the power and hope and promise of the resurrection. We are given hope, encouragement, and comfort at the graveside, that even though the grave may claim our mortal bodies, our belief in the cross of Christ seals us for eternal life. And so things we probably should not take for granted or take lightly. In the gospel today, the disciple asks Jesus, who has been praying for a while, and of course, people want an identity. Lord, teach us to pray as John the Baptist taught his disciples, his followers, to pray, so that every time somebody heard that prayer, they knew that they were followers of John the Baptist. So give us something we can hang on to, that we can pray over and over again to remind us that we are your followers. And so he gives them the essence of his prayer, the Lord's Prayer. The first word, Father, acknowledging God, versus I want, or you're wonderful, or this or that. Father, hallowed be your name. Honoring God's holiness and in so doing, honoring the holiness that God offers to us. Certainly the great call to holiness, with perseverance, trying and trying and trying again, over and over and over, until we appreciate, come to understand, and perhaps get it right. Give us each day our daily bread. And they're not asking for a slice of Wonder Bread, which, the Weber Bread Company no longer exists, so you know how old I am. They're not asking for a sandwich. They're asking for their daily bread. An allusion to Christ who gives himself to us in the Eucharist, the bread of life. Give us that bread every single day, that we might be reminded that we are yours and you are always with us, that you give us strength, nourishment, encouragement, hope, forgiveness, compassion. And as you give to us, so we too are called to give to the world that same strength, hope, compassion, and mercy. And so the prayer takes on a unique meaning. It's much more than just some words put together. All too often, taking the signs of the cross, prayer for granted, as something routine and ritual. Today the Lord reminds us that there is nothing routine about faith. There is nothing automatic about faith. It is a decision at every moment, every day. It is a decision to enter into the life of Christ, to enter into his life for the life of the world. All too often we think, here's my prayer frisbee, and I'll just put those things on there, and there you go, God. And it goes up, and I don't see it coming back. And because God doesn't throw the frisbee back with a response, I become frustrated. Or he sends it back, and it's not the response I want, or that I hoped for. And my frustration level continues to grow and increase. Sometimes to the point that people simply walk away from God because God didn't answer my prayer the way I wanted it to. Well, think about it. Prayer is conversation. The words are the mere conversation starter. Are you listening to God? Do you really accept what God gives back to you and try and wrestle with it, understand it, struggle with it sometimes, and put it into practice? God sees more than we see. God sees farther ahead than we can ever see. And so things like the sign of the cross, the Lord's Prayer, those things that can become routine must always be things we embrace, things we do on purpose and with meaning, lest the meaning escape us and we walk off the path of life. And so today, my sisters and brothers, as we have welcomed the catechumens among us, they remind us of the importance of simple things, such as the word, yes, Lord, I will follow you, holding the cross, responding in prayer. A solid reminder of who we are called to become in the life of Christ.